everyone. I thought today I would talk about a favourite subject of mine, which is movement in art. I used to be, before I was an artist, I was a professional dancer and then a teacher of dance and choreography. So I get a little bit obsessed with movement in art. I don't like art that's very static. So I'm always experimenting to try and find ways where I can put movement into what I'm producing. So I thought maybe I would just, having spent some time at the sea recently, I thought I would just spend a little few minutes talking about how I put movement into art. I'm sure you've all got your ways, and do share if you have in the comments below. But it is lovely to see a piece of artwork feel like it's taking off, or that it might continue beyond the page. I think it does help the art tell its own story. So I'll switch the camera around and you can see what you think. Okay, let's have a little think about this one. So I'm starting with some prints actually that I've done recently in the studio, and I use my gel press for this. And when I'm using my gel press, I am always looking, that's beautiful, that's on tissue, do you see? I am always looking for movement. And actually what I do when I get my gel press out is I'm constantly turning it as I'm working, and I find that really helps with my mark making and what I do. And then obviously I'm experimenting with different textures. So for example, this one was made with tissue paper resting over the top, which you kind of scrunch up, and then when you take it off, obviously you're left with those sorts of marks. So that's just a little bit printing. And then I kind of took my favourite one, which was this kind of, I'll show you the back, that might be easier, yeah, the kind of wave effect. And that was really watching the rise and fall. I'm very familiar with the fall of a wave as it breaks, but I think I was less familiar with the rise. So I was really trying to experiment with that, and to kind of focus on that rise movement. So I was really quite pleased with the way that turned out. I've just made those into wee books. And similar to the scrunching idea that I shared a minute ago, this is acrylic paint onto a piece of, oh, I don't know, mixed media paper or watercolour paper, two colours, white and blue. And then all I did was put a piece of cling film over it, and again kind of move it around a bit. Then you have to be patient. You leave it for 24 hours, and then when it's dry, you take the cling film off, and you're left with these lovely marks, which you can then work with. And I just think that creates its own form of movement. I love that. You have to be patient, but it's worth waiting. Moving into stitching, saying with a similar sort of theme. This was the postcard I did for the Stitch Conversation. If you haven't seen that, I'll pop the link to that video below. That was a conversation in stitching where there were no words, and we started in John O'Groats. No, we didn't. We started at Land's End and we finished at John O'Groats, and we did it virtually through lockdown. So you got an email with a picture of the postcard before yours, and then you had to make a stitch response, and this was the final one. But you can see here that I'm getting movement in by just simply stitching down and allowing the fabric and the fibers to create the movement. And I just love that. It's not even couching, it's tiny little holding stitches. That's all it is. And letting and this is sari silk waist, and this is Wensleydale wall tops, and I just love the way that it creates its own movement. And I think in these circumstances you have to let the fabric find its way. So I really like that. A little bit more intensive stitching would be something like this. If you don't know Canfa stitching, look that up, because that's just lovely. It shows a way of moving through, and it's all done by eye, so it's not accurate parallel lines at all. But I love that. I love it when it slightly goes a bit awry when I'm not concentrating so much. But I love Canfa stitch, and I think it just gives a great movement just around the sun there. And this was a journal I made for myself for a project I was doing on macramore, And in fact, the exhibition for this is also, I'll pop that video down below because that's also on my channel, and you can see how else we worked with movement. So that was lovely. And then I just sort of grabbed a few of my sketchbook pieces really, and just to sort of show how I put movement in. And you know, it might just be simply dots, just to give the page a bit of movement and to create a context for something which is very static. You know, seed heads are very static, very strong but static shape, and these are just made with cotton buds. Do you see? Just dab them in lightly in paint, and I think that could be quite effective. Scribbling, I'm a great scribbler. I was a scribbler as a child. I doodle all the time. Putting scribble marks on as you go, just mark making, just to give the page a bit of movement. Similar one here, but just with this contrasting colour, so you just catch glimpses of the movement. You're not flooding the page with movement. And here again, do you see? Just there, just the slightest touch of movement in, I think, what would be a very static image otherwise, and against a very static background. So I think that's important. So I hope that's helpful. I'll finish with this one, which is really movement on textile again with the Wensleydale wool. And I just love that. That's my favourite. And then I've picked that up from the sketches that I've done. And you can see how I've moved from sketch to textile art. This was a sketch for a piece that I did, but I'd like to do that big. I think that would make a nice cushion cover or a top of a quilt or something. Just something a bit different. And it just takes the eye. What does movement do? Well, it takes the eye for a little wander, doesn't it? And I think that adds interest to your work. So I hope that's useful, and I'll see you next time.